The challenge begins. The dropship shuddered violently as it pierced the thick atmosphere of Planeta Hilo 7, a frozen wasteland orbiting a distant blue star. Inside, 12 cadets from the Galactic Federation Academy braced themselves, their various alien anatomies tensing against the turbulence. Among them sat Elena Reyes, the only human participating in this year's final survival examination. "Atmospheric entry complete," announced the ship's AI in a flat, professional tone. Surface temperatures registering at -112 degrees. Wind velocity at 73 knots. Survival probability 37%. Elena tightened the straps of her standard-issue survival pack. Unlike her fellow cadets, she wore no special adaptive gear, just Federation standard thermal wear that was barely adequate for the conditions they were about to face. Her olive skin had paled slightly, but her dark eyes remained fixed and determined beneath her short, practical haircut. From across the cabin, Sorlex, a towering reptilian Draxian with naturally armored skin, fixed her with a look of thinly veiled contempt. "The warm blood will freeze before nightfall," he hissed to his neighbor, a silicon-based Pavari named Shivs. Shivs's crystalline body shimmered as she replied. "The instructors should never have allowed primitive species into these trials. It's unnecessarily cruel." Though they spoke in their native tongues, Elena's translator implant caught every word. She had heard it all before. Humans were seen as fragile, primitive newcomers to the galactic community, barely 2 centuries into space exploration, while other species counted their interstellar histories in millennia. "Final approach," the AI announced. "Prepare for landing and deployment." Captain Zoran, their blue-skinned Alteran instructor, stood at the front of the cabin. "Cadets, your objective is simple. Survive 72 hours on the surface with minimal equipment. You will be retrieved from your landing zones if you endure the full duration. Your packs contain emergency beacons to be used only in critical life-threatening situations." His 4 eyes swept the cabin, lingering momentarily on Elena. "The use of a beacon is an automatic failure. This exam tests your resourcefulness, adaptability, and survival instinct, qualities required of all Federation officers. Good luck." The dropship lurched suddenly, alarms blaring to life. Elena's stomach dropped as the vessel banked sharply to the left. "Navigation failure," the AI reported, its voice maintaining that infuriating calm. "Thruster malfunction detected. Emergency landing protocols engage." Captain Zoran grabbed a handrail. "Brace for impact." The ship plummeted, smashing through a field of ice spires before skidding across a vast frozen plain. Metal screamed against ice as the vessel spun wildly before coming to rest at the edge of a deep crevasse. Emergency lights bathed the cabin in pulsing red. "Hull breach detected," the AI announced. "Atmospheric contamination imminent. Evacuation advised." Elena unstrapped herself, checking for injuries. Her right wrist throbbed, sprained, not broken. Around her, the other cadets were in various states of distress. The impact had thrown them against walls and each other. "Everyone out." Captain Zoran commanded, overriding the main hatch. It slid open with a hydraulic hiss, unleashing a blast of frigid air that stole Elena's breath instantly. They stumbled onto the ice, the wind slicing through their gear like knives. The dropship's fuselage groaned ominously behind them. "The vessel is unstable," Captain Zoran shouted over the howling wind. "We must disperse immediately. Remember your training. 72 hours. Make your way back to your original designated landing points for extraction." As if to emphasize his point, the ship shifted, metal plates buckling as it slid several meters closer to the crevasse. "Go," Zoran ordered, and the cadets scattered in different directions. Elena took a moment to survey her surroundings while the others fled. The landscape was a monochrome nightmare of ice and snow stretching to the horizon, broken only by jagged crystalline formations that rose like teeth from the frozen plain. 2 pale suns hung low in the sky, offering light but minimal warmth. She determined her heading using the ship's position and the twin suns, then set off at a measured pace, careful not to work up a sweat that would later freeze. Plodding through knee-deep snow, Alina mentally cataloged her resources: 1 thermal blanket, a multi-tool, 2 ration bars, a fire starter with limited fuel, a water purification tablet, and a small medical kit. Not enough for 72 hours in these conditions. Not nearly enough. After 30 minutes of trudging through the worsening snowstorm, Alina spotted a cluster of ice formations forming a natural windbreak. She made her way toward it, recognizing the value of shelter before all else. Survival basics from Earth's most extreme environments came flooding back, lessons passed down through generations of polar explorers and wilderness survivors. Reaching the ice formations, Alina found a narrow space between 2 massive ice slabs. Using her multi-tool, she began widening and deepening the crevice, excavating a small cave just large enough for her body. The work warmed her temporarily, but she knew the exertion was burning precious calories she couldn't afford to lose. Once the hollow was deep enough, Alina crawled inside and unfolded her thermal blanket, creating a reflective barrier between herself and the ice. With the wind somewhat blocked, she could think more clearly. Next priority: heat. The Federation-issue fire starter was designed for standard operations, not extreme conditions. It would run out quickly if used continuously. Instead, Alina gathered small ice chips and packed them into a depression she carved into the floor. She activated the fire starter for just long enough to melt the ice, creating a small pool of water. Conservation of resources, she muttered to herself, remembering her grandfather's lessons from camping in the Andean mountains. Small, controlled applications of heat are more efficient than constant flames. With water secured, Alina turned to insulation. She pulled loose threads from the inner lining of her pack and packed snow around the entrance of her shelter, leaving just enough space for air circulation. The snow would act as an insulator, trapping what little heat her body generated. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped further. Alina's crude shelter maintained just enough warmth to keep her from freezing, but sleep was impossible. Every few hours, she forced herself to move, exercising in the confined space to generate body heat. By dawn of the first day, Alina ventured out, needing to improve her shelter and find additional resources. The storm had intensified, with ice crystals that stung her exposed skin like needles. She squinted against the whiteout conditions, her face mask already stiff with frozen condensation from her breath. 100 meters from her shelter, Alina spotted something dark against the snow, a figure lying prone, half buried in a drift. She approached cautiously, recognizing the iridescent scales of Mirik, an amphibious aquarian cadet. Mirik's breathing was shallow, his normally vibrant scales dulled to a sickly gray. His specialized environment suit had malfunctioned, the thermal regulators frozen solid. Without them, his cold-blooded physiology was shutting down rapidly. Alina knew the others would have left him. Federation training emphasized self-reliance. Each cadet was responsible for their own survival. But something more fundamental than Federation protocols guided her actions: human compassion, perhaps, or simple stubborn defiance of the cold equation of survival. "Mirik," she said, shaking him gently. "Can you hear me?" His large, multifaceted eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her face. "Human," he croaked, the translator struggling with his weakened voice. "Leave. Save yourself." "Not happening," Alina replied, checking his vital signs. His core temperature had fallen dangerously low. His advanced suit, designed to maintain perfect homeostasis, had become useless technology in the face of Hilo 7's extreme conditions. With no time to waste, Alina dragged Mirik toward her shelter, her muscles burning with the effort. The aquarian was nearly twice her weight, his dense bone structure designed for deep ocean pressure rather than gravity environments. By the time they reached the ice formation, Alina's lungs felt raw from exertion in the frigid air. She widened her shelter frantically, sacrificing elegance for speed. Once large enough, she pulled Mirik inside. "Your technology failed you," Alina said, examining his suit. "But we don't need it." She removed the outer shell of his environment suit, exposing his scaled skin to the slightly warmer air of the shelter. Mirek shivered violently, his species equivalent of shock setting in. Elena activated her fire starter again, this time melting a larger quantity of ice. She dipped her spare sock into the warm water and began rubbing Mirek's extremities, focusing on the nerve clusters she knew existed at the base of his dorsal ridge, a detail she'd studied during xenobiology training. "What are you doing?" Mirek whispered, confusion evident in his weakened voice. "Stimulating circulation," Elena replied. "Your body can heal itself if we can just raise your core temperature enough to jumpstart your metabolic processes." She worked methodically, alternating between massaging his limbs and pressing the warm, damp cloth against the thermal nodes along his spine. Gradually, Mirek's breathing steadied, and his scales began to regain some of their luster. "How do you know this technique?" he asked, strength returning to his voice. "Our medical sciences aren't that different from Earth's," Elena interrupted. "My grandmother was a doctor who specialized in treating hypothermia. Some principles are universal." Mirek's multifaceted eyes studied her with new interest. "Our instructors, they said humans rely on crude methods because you lack proper technology." Elena smiled thinly. "Sometimes crude works when sophisticated fails." She gestured to his disabled environment suit. "Your suit tried to create the perfect environment and couldn't handle the strain. My approach isn't perfect, but it's sustainable." As day one on Hilo 7 drew to a close, Elena realized their shelter wouldn't be adequate for a second night. The ice walls were conducting too much cold, and their combined body heat wasn't sufficient. "We need to move," she told Mirek, who had recovered enough to sit upright. "I saw a deeper fissure about 200 meters east. If we can reach it before dark, we might find better protection." "Why would you help me?" Mirek asked suddenly. "The examination is individual assessment. My failure should benefit your ranking." Elena paused in her preparations. "Where I come from, we have a saying. The true measure of a society is found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. I'm not looking to pass an exam at the cost of your life." Before Mirek could respond, a distant boom echoed across the ice field. They exchanged alarmed glances. "That sounded like an explosion," Elena said, crawling to the entrance of their shelter and peering out into the swirling snow. In the distance, a plume of dark smoke rose against the white landscape. The dropship, which had been precariously balanced at the edge of the crevasse, had finally succumbed to gravity and structural damage. "The emergency supplies," Mirek gasped. "The communication equipment." "Gone," Elena confirmed grimly. "Which means we're truly on our own now." Sanctuary in the storm. By the morning of the second day, Elena had successfully relocated Mirek and herself to the deeper ice fissure she'd spotted earlier. Working through the night, she had expanded the natural formation into a more substantial shelter, using principles of igloo construction she'd learned from historical archives about Arctic explorers. The new shelter was dome-shaped with a small entrance tunnel that prevented wind from blowing directly inside. More importantly, she had discovered that the fissure extended deeper into the ice, revealing a crucial secret: geothermal activity. A tiny vent released warm air from deep within the planet's crust, not enough to make them comfortable, but sufficient to raise the ambient temperature by several critical degrees. The Federation surveys didn't indicate geothermal activity on Hilo 7, Mirek observed, his strength gradually returning as they huddled near the warm vent. "Official surveys often miss what direct observation reveals," Elena replied, carefully melting ice over the vent to create drinking water. On Earth, indigenous peoples often knew details about their environments that scientists missed for centuries. Mirek's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of thoughtfulness in his species. "Your methods are unexpected. My people would have attempted to repair the environmental suit, and might have succeeded," Elena acknowledged. "Different approaches for different worlds. The key is flexibility." Their conversation was interrupted by a faint sound carried on the wind. A cry for help. Elena moved to the entrance tunnel and peered out. The storm had temporarily abated, revealing a clearer view of the frozen landscape. In the distance, she spotted movement, a limping figure dragging something across the ice. Without hesitation, Elena grabbed her pack. "Someone's in trouble. I'll be back." "You'll freeze," Mirik protested. "Your mammalian physiology." "We'll have to manage," Elena finished, pulling up her hood. "Keep the shelter warm." She ventured out into the bitter cold, moving as quickly as she dared toward the distant figure. As she drew closer, she recognized Shivs, the crystalline Pevari, dragging the unconscious form of Sorlex, the Draxian who had mocked humans earlier. "Shivs," Elena called, approaching cautiously. The Pevari's silicon-based body was designed for extreme cold, but even she showed signs of distress, her normally transparent form clouded with stress fractures. "Human," Shivs acknowledged, her voice tinkling like breaking glass. "Sorlex's thermal core has failed. His biological systems are shutting down." Elena knelt beside the massive reptilian. His armored skin had turned a dull gray, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. "How long has he been unconscious?" "Approximately 4 standard hours," Shivs replied. "I attempted to share my thermal energy, but the transfer was inefficient." Elena examined Sorlex quickly. The Draxian's specialized internal furnace, an evolutionary adaptation that allowed his species to survive on their volcanic homeworld, had extinguished in Hilo 7's extreme cold. Without it, his massive body was quickly becoming a liability rather than an asset. "I have shelter," Elena said, "but we can't move him alone. He's too heavy." Shivs's crystalline form shifted. "I can construct a sled from ice, but it will take time." "No need." Elena unzipped her thermal jacket and spread it on the ground beside Sorlex. "Help me roll him onto this. We can drag him together." Using Elena's jacket as an improvised sled, they managed to pull Sorlex across the ice toward the shelter. The journey was arduous, with both of them straining against the Draxian's weight and the treacherous terrain. When they finally reached the shelter, Mirik emerged to help them maneuver Sorlex through the entrance tunnel. Inside, Elena immediately began examining the unconscious Draxian more thoroughly. "His thermal core is intact but dormant," she said, feeling the specialized organ beneath his armored chestplate. "It needs an energy source to reignite." Shivs tilted her crystalline head. "The Federation emergency kits contain no power cells compatible with Draxian biology." "We don't need Federation technology," Elena replied, reaching for her fire starter. "We need a spark." With careful precision, Elena used her multi-tool to create a small incision at a specific point on Sorlex's chest, exposing the specialized thermal organ beneath. The organ resembled a dark, coal-like nodule surrounded by specialized tissue. On their homeworld, young Draxians have their thermal cores ignited by the breath of their parents, Elena explained as she worked. "It's both biological and cultural, a gift of fire." "How do you know this?" Mirik asked, fascinated despite the dire situation. "I studied cynobiology extensively before joining the academy," Elena replied. "My specialty was comparative adaptations to extreme environments." She positioned her fire starter directly above the exposed organ. "The trick is providing enough initial heat to start the reaction without burning the surrounding tissue." With steady hands, Elena activated the fire starter at its lowest setting, directing a small, controlled flame toward the thermal core. For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden flare, the dark nodule began to glow from within, pulsing with orange-red light. Sorlex gasped, his massive body convulsing once before he drew a deep, shuddering breath. His eyes snapped open, vertical pupils dilating in confusion. "What happened?" he growled, attempting to sit up. "Your thermal core failed," Elena explained, helping him into a more comfortable position. "I reignited it." The Draxian stared at her, uncomprehending. "Impossible." Only a flame priest of my world cold. Not impossible. Shivs interjected, her crystalline voice sharp. The humans saved you when your technology failed. Thorlex fell silent, his reptilian features unreadable as he processed this information. By the end of the second day, word of Alina's survival shelter had spread among the scattered cadets. 3 more arrived seeking refuge: Ziv, an avian peregrine with frost-damaged wings; Thula, a gelatinous morphid whose containment field had shattered; and Vex, a normally arrogant Centaurian whose advanced exoskeleton had frozen solid. Alina worked tirelessly to accommodate them all, expanding the shelter and developing systems to maintain livable conditions. She created a water collection system that captured condensation from their breath. She established a rotation for sharing body heat. Most importantly, she kept their spirits alive with stories of Earth's greatest survival tales, of Shackleton in Antarctica, of Andean plane crash survivors, of desert explorers who endured against impossible odds. You speak of these humans with pride, Vex observed on the night of the second day. Yet they used no technology superior to what we possess. They used what they had, Alina replied simply. And they understood something vital. Survival isn't about individual strength. It's about adaptation and cooperation. The third day brought the worst storm yet. Ice crystals driven by hurricane-force winds scored the surface, and temperatures dropped to levels that threatened even their improved shelter. The geothermal vent provided less heat as ice accumulated around its source. During a momentary break in the storm, their shelter's entrance tunnel collapsed, trapping them inside with a dwindling air supply. Panic threatened to overwhelm the group until Alina organized them into teams, assigning specific tasks for digging out. Shifts, your crystalline structure can cut through ice. Focus on creating an initial opening, she directed. Thorlex, your strength can clear the debris. Mirik, monitor our oxygen levels. The rest of you, prepare for possible evacuation. They worked together seamlessly, their earlier prejudices forgotten in the face of immediate danger. When they finally broke through to the surface, they discovered the storm had reshaped the landscape entirely. Their shelter was now partially buried under a massive snowdrift. We cannot stay here, Thula observed, her gelatinous form quivering anxiously. But moving in this storm means certain death. Alina stood at the new opening, surveying the blinding whiteness beyond. Not certain, she said quietly. Just very probable. It was then that they heard it. A faint, rhythmic beeping carried on the wind. An emergency beacon had been activated. Someone's in trouble, Ziv said, his avian senses picking up the direction. Approximately 1 kilometer northwest. Alina's face hardened with determination. That's where Captain Zoran established his position after the crash. You cannot seriously consider a rescue, Vex protested. The examination protocol clearly states. I don't care what the protocol states, Alina interrupted. I'm not leaving anyone to die out there. To her surprise, Thorlex stepped forward. I will accompany you, human. My thermal core is strong enough to withstand the journey. One by one, the others volunteered as well, until they had organized a search party, leaving only the most vulnerable behind in the shelter. The journey through the storm was nightmarish. Visibility extended barely beyond arm's length, and the wind threatened to topple them with each step. Alina led them, navigating by instinct and the increasingly loud signal of the emergency beacon. They found Captain Zoran half buried in snow, his blue skin pale and lifeless. His emergency shelter had collapsed under the weight of accumulated ice, crushing his leg and trapping him in the open. The beacon lay beside him, activated in his final moments of consciousness. Working together, they freed the instructor and began emergency treatment. Alina coordinated their efforts, applying survival techniques from multiple worlds. Thorlex's thermal radiation, Shifts' ability to form a protective crystalline barrier against the wind, Mirik's knowledge of Alteran physiology. By the time they returned to their shelter, dragging Captain Zoran on an improvised stretcher, The storm had begun to abate. The twin suns broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the transformed landscape. Inside the expanded shelter, now housing 9 beings from 8 different worlds, Zoran regained consciousness to find himself surrounded by cadets who had put aside competition in favor of cooperation. "You activated your beacon," he said weakly to Elena. "You failed the examination." Elena shook her head. "I never activated my beacon, sir. We heard yours." The captain's 4 eyes widened in surprise. "You risked your lives for mine." "It wasn't a risk," Sorlex rumbled unexpectedly. "It was a certainty of success. The human taught us that survival is not about technology or individual strength. It's about adaptation and cooperation." Zoran looked around the shelter, taking in the ingenious arrangements Elena had created. The water collection system, the heat distribution network, the reinforced walls that incorporated elements from each species' knowledge. "This was meant to be an individual assessment," he said slowly. "Yet you have created something unexpected." Elena smiled tiredly. "Humans have a saying, Captain. Necessity is the mother of invention. Sometimes the most advanced solution is simply the one that works." As the 72-hour mark approached and the extraction ships appeared on the horizon, the cadets emerged from their shelter not as competitors, but as a unified group. They stood together on the ice, watching as Federation rescue craft descended through Hilo 7's now clear skies. The senior officers who arrived were clearly shocked to find all 12 cadets alive, an unprecedented outcome for the Hilo 7 examination. They were even more surprised to discover that the survivors had formed a cohesive unit around the leadership of the supposedly primitive human. In the debriefing chamber aboard the rescue vessel, Captain Zoran, now recovered enough to stand with assistance, addressed the Academy officials. "The purpose of the final survival examination has always been to identify those qualities essential for Federation officers," he stated formally. "We designed it to test advanced technology application, individual resilience, and resource management." He paused, looking at the gathered cadets, his gaze lingering on Elena. "But Cadet Reyes has demonstrated that there are older, more fundamental qualities equally vital to our mission: adaptability, cooperation, and what humans call ingenuity, the ability to create solutions from minimal resources." He straightened to his full height despite his injury. "I recommend all cadets present receive full officer commissions, with special commendation for Cadet Elena Reyes, whose leadership saved not only her fellow cadets, but this instructor as well." As they departed Hilo 7's orbit, Elena stood at a viewport watching the frozen planet recede into the distance. Sorlex approached, his massive form casting a shadow over her. "I once believed humans were too primitive for the Federation," he said, his voice unusually subdued. "I was wrong." Elena smiled. "Not primitive, just different. Sometimes the oldest solutions are still the best ones." "The Academy will change after this," Sorlex observed. "Your methods will be studied." "They're not really my methods," Elena replied. "They're humanity's collective wisdom. Thousands of years of learning how to survive through cooperation rather than technology alone." As the ship accelerated to FTL speed, the frozen hell of Hilo 7 vanished in a blur of stars. But what remained was a new understanding between species, a recognition that true strength comes not from technological advancement or evolutionary advantages, but from the ability to adapt, to cooperate, and to see value in different approaches. In the end, it wasn't superior technology that conquered Hilo 7's deadly environment. It was the most fundamental quality of humanity: the stubborn refusal to accept defeat, and the wisdom to know that survival is rarely a solitary achievement.